All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome here. I can see people in the room of the webinar and people here in TRU. And I am very happy to welcome here today our speaker, Bayo Akomolafe, and to welcome everyone today in Shukwet Uluk, the unceded and never surrendered lands of the Shukwet peoples. And so happy to be here and so happy to have an audience here in the room to be with Bayo Akomolafe. I'm very excited for this talk, Bayo, and so happy to welcome you here to Thompson Rivers University in
Thank you, sister.
So.
Okay. Thank you, sister, for the invitation. And I can see some of my siblings in the room. I'm waving. Can you wave? Let me see if you're there. Okay, good. I guess I can see some of you there. Um, I'm somewhere in San Francisco, so far away from home. I live in India, and I um I work across the world, but when I teach, I'm teaching mostly in the United States. I'm professor in Macalester College of American Studies. Um, and I'm here because my sister invited me to speak about this very beautiful topic um, that is vast and complicated and difficult to speak to now, especially in these moments. So I think I want to start by first acknowledging, not just greeting you, as is the vocation of my people, the Yoruba people from West Africa, but acknowledging that these are indeed painful times. And there's no sidestepping that. These are I was watching the news recently and I was listening to the ways that the news anchors were spiritedly speaking about this new Canadian gesture called elbows up. Did I get it right? It's elbows up, right? And and I had a feeling of yes, you know, like let's go, let's do it. Um, Even though I don't usually uh, circumscribe my politics around, I don't circumscribe my politics around nation state dynamics. I still felt the very beautiful need to think, uh, you know, to bring myself into that process, into the yay that everyone is screaming, and down with imperialism is what I was saying in my heart. And at the same time, the elbows up imperative resuscitates the logic of imperialism, right? There are ways that resistance can reinforce the dynamics that created resistance in the first place. Um, so I just want to acknowledge that these are difficult times. How to respond in the time of rising fascism, the orange version, how to respond in a time of fires and collapse is is always difficult and fraught with tensions. Uh, it's especially even more difficult for people who have been racialized, right? I grew up in a monolithic society, Nigeria, which is the blackest country on earth. It has more black bodies than any other conglomeration of black bodies on the planet. So I grew up. I see some sisters smiling in the background, like like probably they're Nigerian. Are you Nigerian sisters there? No?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It felt that way. It's like I felt a smile of recognition. But yes, I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and I didn't experience racialization in the ways that my siblings across the pond are experiencing it. And there is something to be said about what tariffs, what the resuscitation of whiteness, white modernity is doing right now. It must be hard. The other day, Elon Musk was on TV, and uh, if you looked closely, you could almost get a sense of pity, right? It seems ridiculous, but he lost what, $100 billion in one day? Did he? I think. And
Yeah.
I almost felt like going, oh, that's a lot of money to lose. He must be feeling sad, right? And then Trump started to purchase Teslas in front of the White House. And it really forces you to think about what people who cannot afford eggs are going through right now, and the trade wars, and the decline in democratic trust, and pandemics, and the Anthropocene. This is my highfalutin, long-winded way of saying we are in difficult times and we need a politics of tenderness. So it must be surprising to you then to have heard that there is a talk called Why I Am Not an Anti-Racist. You must be confused about that, because it would seem that this is the time to be anti-racist. If there's anything we must be now, it must be anti-racist. So why speak about, um, you know, being not anti-racist? What is this Nigerian trying to say? Well, this is what I want to speak about today. And I have some slides to speak about it. I will enter into the tradition of storytelling. And I hope that at the end of it, and I know I have just an hour, but at the end of it, you're not, my point isn't to evangelize my perspective, but to invite a provocation so that we can start to sense the more than human intelligent dynamics that often takes resistance. Oh, my volume is low. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not with my usual accompaniments, my mic in my office. I'm traveling, you see, so I don't have my usual conveniences. Apologies. I'll try to speak louder. Um, so I was saying that we will enter into the space of provocation. Do not think that the essence here is for you to get everything I say. I'm inviting us to think together, right? To think together, to open up space for other kinds of possibilities in thought, and to ask different but difficult questions, okay? Uh, it seems also important, before I launch into slides, to say that my traditions, the kinds of intellectual traditions that feed me, are Yoruba, they're feminist materialist, they're indigenous, they're Black studies traditions. So I'm imbricated in these fields of conversation. This talk is not an attempt to dismiss those traditions of thought. They're an attempt to expand them and to investigate the creases and the gaps and the cracks in them, okay? I also think with para-ontology. Sister, I'm sure you're familiar with Fred Moulton, Saidiya Hartman, Nahum Chandler. These are Black scholars that engage in what is known in the literature as para-ontology. I don't have an hour. I don't have, this would take 2 weeks to get through, but I'm trying to do what is possible within 60 minutes, okay? Um, I also wanted to say quickly that it is not possible to speak about anti-racism as if it were one thing. There is no singular thing called anti-racism, right? Um, the anti-racism of W.E.B. Du Bois was different from the anti-racism of Booker T. Washington, right? The anti-racism of Martin Luther King had dissimilarities from the anti-racism of Malcolm X, you might say. The anti-racism of, if you're thinking about contemporary scholars, Ibram Zendi, or Kendi rather, is different from the anti-racism of Kianga Yamata Taylor. So there isn't a single thing called anti-racism. However, and this is the second point I want to make, and the heart of my talk today, is that even though anti-racism as a discourse and as a conversation is broad, it is ecological, um, it's diverse. Even though there are many different ways to enter into it, it is possible to discern a singular strand, a popular strand of this vocation. And it is this definition of anti-racism as opposition to racism that I want to wrestle with. Okay, that's what I want to wrestle with today. And to suggest, as you will see in my slides, that anti-racism in that particularity, in that specificity, is already a commitment to white modernity, is a commitment to the accommodations of white modernity. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to start with a story or two stories. Can you all see this? Can you see my beautiful slides?
Yes.
I took time to make these slides, okay? So just so you know how much I care about this moment, you know. Designed from scratch. This isn't a template. So if you're looking for a slide builder, I'm kidding. Okay, I want to tell a story. And this story is from, look at the time. This story is premised in the traditions of my people. There is a phenomenon called Ogbanje. Ogbanje. And Ogbanje is the story of child mortality, but it is more mythologically the story of spirits crossing into the material world, taking up form as a child in a woman's body, being born, and then being so in love with where they came from, the spiritual world, that they leave immediately, maybe 3 weeks after. It was the ways that these traditions storied child mortality, right? Children died early in those days. They did not have the medicinal conveniences that we have. And so one way of accounting for that was the Ogbanje mythology, cosmology. It was the story of spirits crossing into our world. If you want to get a sense of Ogbanje, you might read Ben Okri. Ben Okri wrote a book, an award-winning book called The Famished Road. Okay. Well, in this story that I'm going to tell, that I tell right now, this story does not exist. I made this up, but it borrows heavily from the Ogbanje phenomenon. So imagine that a wild god crosses every now and then into our material realm. Just imagine with me. This wild god is curious about humans, and every time it crosses, it's a risk. It's a risk to enter into a portal. It could be fatal to humans, and it could be fatal to the gods crossing too. So this wild god crosses into the material world, finds a bunch of humans, and introduces itself to these humans. Now, the way it introduces itself is not by stretching out its hand for a handshake. The way it does this is to do signs and wonders. So it causes weather events, things start to happen around it, and appropriately, those humans fall to their knees in an act of worship. All right? And this happens over and over again. The wild god comes, introduces itself, cavorts with the humans, and then they respond with worship. And worship is deep stuff. Worship is not a joke. Right? And then the wild god goes back. But every crossing is not just a risk, it is costly because, you know, to the humans, to the gods, it's just a day to cross. But to the humans, it's hundreds of years, decades, right? So this wild god keeps on going and coming. But one day it comes, years have passed, and it doesn't find the humans in the usual places that they usually congregate. Now they're buildings of peculiar fashion, and it locates itself there. It moves closer to to the building and finds that in this particular building that it wants to interrogate, the humans are applauding and making a ruckus. They're making noise. And so the god is excited about entering this new sociality. And so it enters into the building and finds out that there is a bunch of humans seated in formation. And there is another group of humans who are seemingly presenting to the audience, what we will recognize as an audience. The wild god comes, finds its way on the stage, and starts to perform signs and wonders, hopefully eliciting the same kind of response that it has elicited for thousands of years. But guess what? This time, when it pulls a rabbit from its hat, it's applause that it gets. And there's nothing more scandalous than a condition or a situation where a god expects worship and what it gets is applause. There's an ontological inflection there, right? Because it's no longer a call to something terrifying, something near immaculate, something perhaps transcendent. It's entertainment now. It's Netflix. And so the wild god forgets eventually. It's traumatized by what's happening, but it forgets eventually what it is there to do. And it too becomes a magician. It too struggles for more applause and likes on Facebook. It too wants to be seen on the stage. A companion wild god comes and tries to help its friend remember where it came from, to remember the wild crossing that gods undertake over eons of years. But it is very difficult for this god, this lost wild god to remember, because now it is accommodated within an economy of entertainment, and it cannot remember the crossing any longer. That's my hastily contrived metaphor or story of a wild crossing, but it is not as contrived as one might think. There are historical antecedents. I told you that I come from Nigeria and I'm of the Yoruba people, but Nigeria is composed of hundreds of tribes and peoples, even hundreds, maybe 1,000 languages, right? And dialects. The people known as the Igbo people live in eastern Nigeria. Now, over time, in pre-colonial days, the Igbo people had a select group of people called the Osu people. The Osu people, let me see the next slide. Yeah, this is a story about the Osu people. This is history. The Osu people were a priestly caste of people. They were very special. Sister, have you read Chinua Achebe, Monica? Have you read Chinua Achebe? Things Fall Apart, The Arrow of God, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Chinua Achebe famously writes about the Osu people. In one instance, about how people run away from them, but I'm getting beside the point here. The Osu people were a priestly caste of people. They were exonerated from ordinary affairs in the village. They were highly praised because they dedicated their lives to the sustenance and maintenance and care of the altars of worship. You might call them the people that tended to the places of the wild crossing. So the Osu people were constantly taking care of things. They standing on business, right? And then the British colonial lords and masters came. Now, I should have said also that the Osu people were untouchable. But they were untouchable in the sense of you couldn't just walk up to them and give them a high five. They were sacred. They were removed, you see. They were to be venerated and revered, right? But when the British came, they came with a Bible and pencils and the cross and an onto epistemology, a way of knowing and a way of being that suggested that these Osu people were impoverished, paganized, less than human elements of society, that they were to be pathologized, that they were filthy, that the way they presented themselves with their dreadlocks was unforgivable in polite society. And so something started to happen. The untouchability of the Osu people became the untouchability of Osu people. They became untouchable in a different molecular sense, as to be forbidden. Today, that is still an ongoing conversation in Nigeria. That's our own caste system, right? People don't marry. If you're one of the true-blooded sons or daughters of the Igbo people, you are not permitted to marry into the Osu people. It might be changing slightly because there have been moves to help change that, but it's such a deeply rooted, seated tradition. And I tell you these two stories to trace out inflections and to parse or to name my theory of accommodations. Okay? In each instance, and I'm going to be doing some reading as well, okay? In each instance, those are the two stories. Bodies become accommodated within other worlding processes, okay? The wild god becomes a magician, and where there was once worship, which is a miraculous act, there is now applause. Perception has shifted. The sensorium, the ways we sense the world has shifted. And so it's no longer a god, just a wily, trickstery magician who knows how to protect his craft. That's an inflection. The Osu people's untouchability becomes a different form of untouchability, right? And so this is how I trace out what I call accommodations. Are you guys still with me? Monica, you still with me? Am I still here?
Yeah, we're
Sorry, because
here.
I'm just looking at my slides only, so it's very awkward, but I'm just gonna press on, okay? Okay,
It just changed the feed.
okay, good. So here's what I mean by accommodations, people. Accommodations are the frameworks of the body, which is my fancy way of saying that bodies don't just show up in the world. Bodies are accommodated into becoming, right? Bodies need frameworks to exist, right? It's not just some backdrop that happens. It's not just accommodation like a container. It's that bodies are intensities within relational fields, right? The only way we're able to say that a car is intelligent is because we have accommodations for making meaning out of that statement, right? We have agreement structures. We have historical antecedents. We have ways of thinking about intelligence that measures intelligence in that way, right? So accommodations are the viscosity, tensile arrangements through which bodies and worlds take shape in relation to each other. I write that they are not passive settings or stable backdrops. They are not external conditions. They are the very conditions through which agency unfolds, right? We live through accommodations and we die through accommodations. They are the ongoing processual negotiations that make agency possible. It's the infrastructure of emergence. Brief story. I read this comic book from a university in India, Rajasthan, from my friend. He's the chancellor, the founder of this university called Swaraj University. His name is Manish Jain. And in this comic strip, uh, a colonial master or a man, I think is represented as a colonial lord, is seated on a table before 5 different animals. We have a monkey, we have a fish in an aquarium, we have a snake, we have a bear, and we have a tiger. And don't ask me to repeat these animals, okay? I'm riffing here and paraphrasing, but we have these animals, and these animals are in a kind of school-like setting, and the teacher basically says to them, okay, your exam, the first question is this, your first practice is this: whoever can scale the tree wins the game, or succeeds at this examination. Of course, all the other animals can try, you know, but the fish is unlikely to make any headway, right? This is accommodation. This is how bodies are framed. It's also a way of thinking about racialization, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Um, to accommodate is not merely to make room for something that already exists, as if the world were a static container awaiting its occupants. Rather, accommodation is the generative friction through which forms come to be. The friction, the negotiations, the failures, the in-betweenness, the tears. Accommodation is not a human thing, it's a more than human thing. Trees, texture, intensity, color, light, emergence, accidents, formulation, microevolution, all of these things make bodies possible and also impossible. We are not accommodated in the waters, for instance, right? And that is not because we choose not to. We can't breathe underwater. Maybe Monica can breathe underwater, but everyone else cannot breathe underwater, so far as I can tell, right? This is a way of thinking about accommodations. It's very important to think through this because I think it helps me make my claims, my startling claims about anti-racism, okay? So just follow me still. Accommodations are the ways bodies, discourses, institutions, affective registers, economies, ecologies, and gestures co-compose and modify each other in the process. To be accommodated is to be caught within a field of permissions and prohibitions, of stabilizations and tremors. This might be out of whack to say in a classroom or in the setting where you are at, but it's easier to pee on the streets of Lagos than it is to pee on the streets of, I don't know, Monica, help me out.
Kamloops. Kamloops is our little city here in Canada.
Yeah, it's I feel no one says you can do it on the streets of Lagos, right? There's no sign saying pee here. There's nothing like that. It just is felt. It's an intelligence. You just know that, oh, I can do this. I can do this on the streets of Chennai, India, where I live, right? But I don't think I can do it in Seattle. Or even if I could do it, I would do it with great difficulty, right? We live in fields of permissions and prohibitions, and we sense it in our body. It doesn't have to be rendered into language before we know what our bodies are capable of doing. It harks back to the Spinozan question, right? What can a body do? This really is the heart of the theorization of accommodations. What is a body? What can a body do, right? To be accommodated is to inhabit architectures of expectation, whether they're legal, racial, spatial, linguistic, political, ecological, or neurotypical. At the same time, accommodations are paradoxical. You see, they're both enabling, as I write here, and constraining. They provide the conditions for life to flourish, right? The same modern conditions that make it possible for us to even think about transferring people to outer space to live on a different planet in the Elon Muskian phallic dreams of saving our planet, right? That condition that makes it possible for us to dream that is also the condition that prohibits us from noticing that maybe that commitment is already a form of poverty, right? Maybe thinking of escape instead of engagement is exactly how whiteness thinks and why we're stuck in our solutionisms. Accommodations allow for movement while also defining the grammars of movement that are legible, permissible, and sustainable within a given order. It's the reason why I say, and I'm going to skip this slide just for skipping reasons. It's the reason why I say white privilege is not merely advantageous to white people. It is also the only way that they have been entrained into acting and being in the world. And I want to say this at this point, just in case you're not familiar with my work. Whiteness is not white people, okay? It's an act of reductionism to take a field and reduce it to bodies or isolated autonomous agents, which itself is an accommodation, right? The idea that whiteness is reducible to white people is an event of whiteness. It's an accommodation of whiteness. And it's an obscurantist way of whiteness repeating itself and continuity. Okay? This is important to say, so I'm not going to skip this after all. Accommodations treat bodies as events, which are provisional and fluid, right? And to speak of the accommodations of whiteness is to speak of the ways whiteness, I just said this, is not just a category, but a set of atmospheric permissions, a climate that conditions what can and cannot be thought, spoken, or felt. It is to notice how whiteness is not simply a racial identity, but a mode of world making. This is the reason why Fred Moulton says that there are no good white people, because there are no good people. It's his fancy way of saying whiteness is a performance. You're white to the degree you perform whiteness. It doesn't, I can look like this and be very white, okay? It's not skin color. It's not phenotypic appearance. It's not surface. It is the algorithm of bodies and how they are rendered mobile, legible, acceptable in a world that is limited, processual, and emergent. Okay? Let's think about that for a moment. We're going slowly, okay? And we don't have much time. There's always not enough time. But let's think about white privilege for a moment. And I don't know why I got this picture of a black dude stopping a taxi, right? Because that's one of the tropes of white privilege, or thinking about white privilege, right? The usual ways we speak about it is that white privilege is something that white people have. White people have white privilege. And when you start out from saying white people have white privilege, you quickly run into trouble. It becomes tautological, right? And I define it here because it's a closed loop. Whiteness is defined as having privilege. Okay, that's the first instance. Number two, privilege is defined as what white people have. Therefore, white people have white privilege. It doesn't move outside of itself. White people have white privilege. Why? Because they're white people. How do you know they're white people? Because they have white privilege. It's like we're going around in a circle. It's an ontology of violence, right? It doesn't know where else to go except in an identitarian way, right? So I write here that this formulation can flatten historical, material, processual complexities into a self-evident truth. What is a tautology? A tautology is an argument that contains its conclusion, right? You're not reaching for the conclusion. The conclusion is already part of the premise, right? White people have white privilege. You've already concluded as such. And so you're going around in circles. There's nowhere else to go in this formulation. I've seen white people in various anti-racist configurations apologize or being made to apologize for their white privilege. The thing with that, people, is that apologizing for white privilege reifies whiteness. It re-centralizes it. But let me put it in a more damning way. Privilege is not what we have. White privilege is not what white people have. White privilege is how bodies are had, okay? That's a different. White privilege is how bodies are accommodated, right? Again, remember, whiteness is not a property of stabilized bodies. Instead, it is how bodies are stabilized. It is how bodies are settled within settlement, right? It's not, the trick here is to learn to think para-ontologically, is to learn to break out of the tautology and to think outside of the circuitous, exhausting loop that most of our activisms and movements and philosophies are entrapped in, right? So white privilege is not a thing that people have. The reason why a white man can stop a taxi or faster than a black dude in the street of New York, or why a white man can make it to be president of the United States and a black woman who is more educated and who is more certified cannot make it as easily as a white man can, is not because the white man has privilege. It's because of the algorithm of experience that settles bodies in particular ways. I'll explain further, right? White privilege is often spoken about as if it is something one has, a tangible possession or an invisible knapsack of advantages, right? But if we follow the threads of our reflections hitherto, we might say that white privilege is less about having and more about being had by a system, less an object of possession and more a mode of entrainment, an arrangement of accommodations that scripts bodies into certain trajectories. You might think about white privilege as the hidden script of experience within white modernity, how we are entrained into behaving. This means that whiteness is not merely about individuals who possess privilege, but about, here's where the text gets denser, but I would like you to pay attention. It's about a gravitational field that pre-configures movement, shaping possibilities in ways that exceed individual agency. One of the crucial insights we have explored so far is that white privilege does not only advantage white people, it demands their participation in its logic. It demands that they see the world within the prisms of virtue and value and isolated agency. So that it's like sitting at the top of a pyramid, alone and exalted. It's a form of exaltation, but it's also a form of isolation. This is white privilege. The same thing that gives you advantage is the same thing that incarcerates you. This is what settlement is, right? And that's why all of this is to help us think about accommodation, how bodies are accommodated, and what we're dealing with here when we speak about anti-racism. So let's get to the point, even though that's my difficulty, 20 minutes before we close, that anti-racism is already a commitment to the accommodations of white modernity. Okay. Anti-racism, as popularly conceived, is not an escape from white modernity, but one of its self-regulating mechanisms. It is how whiteness sustains itself. You might have heard me say, if you know anything about my work, that sometimes the way we address the crisis is the crisis becoming more intelligent. It's one of the ways that systems, and more than systems, terrains and territories reinforce their boundaries. It's when they're able to creatively create space for opposition. The most intelligent companies today have rich HR departments, right? I mean, I told you that I started to teach at Macalester College and in Minnesota. And when I was first introduced to that college, I was invited to speak to the university about my stuff, my thought. And I noticed that there was a place marked in the ground at the entrance of the university. This place was a designated room for protest, right? Right? And these students, very highly charged and activist oriented, were being encouraged to protest the apartheid and genocidal relations in Gaza, right? But they were to protest at certain times within a field of permissions and at a certain location. And I thought to myself that this is how protest writ large behaves, is that the nation state can become so, it can gain tensility, enough tensility to actually accommodate its opposition and say, we care about your different point of view. So protest capitalism on Tuesdays at 6 p.m., right? So this is how I think about what is popularly designated anti-racism. It is the genius of white modernity, the way it controls and governs its closures. In its framing of opposition, anti-racism, as popularly imagined, slips past the slippages, the openings that render whiteness not as a fully determined object, not as totality, but as a material speculation, as a sensorium, as a field that is contradictory and is already proliferating minor gestures and weird fidelities. I hope what I'm saying, I will share these slides because I know I feel the slight burden of fitting my narration within time. So I will share these fugitive slides with you if you would like to read further, okay? I don't know if I have time to tell the story, but I might just do so. I'll rush through it. Monica, you know, because I can see you now, you know the Civil Rights Act of the United States. I know this is not Canadian, but this is American politics. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson and his Vice President Hubert Humphrey, who my professorship is named after. Um, Martin Luther King was in a room somewhere. He had just finished speaking to the with the Poor People's Campaign, and he was with his friend Harry Belafonte. This was this was March. This was 5 days before April 4, 1968, which everyone will recognize as the tragic end of Martin Luther King's life in Memphis when he was killed, right? But 5 days before that, he was in this room and Harry Belafonte noticed that he was worried, that there was something on Martin's face, and he wanted to approach him. So he came to him and said, "Martin, what's wrong?" And Martin Luther King started to speak about something. And Monica, I told this story just 2 days ago to some people gathered in a room. And I remember telling them that I wish Martin had more time to develop this thought. It was a seed of an idea. Martin said to Harry, he said, "Brother, we have been succeeding. We've had legislative victories. 1964 happened a couple of years ago. It seems we're being included and our people can finally find a home for themselves. But why can't I shake this haunting feeling that we're integrating into a burning house?" Okay? That we're integrating into a burning house. Now, I feel that this is a seminal moment in Martin Luther King's life because almost for the entirety of his life, Dr. King had asserted that the moral arc of the universe is long and it dips towards justice. Now, Martin Luther King was noticing something about that formulation. He was beginning to notice that yes, it may dip towards justice, but justice dips towards retrenchment and capture, that there is a hidden curriculum, a dynamic, almost like a pendular swing. If you have a grandfather's clock, I've ever seen one, you know that it swings from the left to the right. It's like their moral, um, their moral goal was not leading towards a final destination. It was moving towards a bend in the road. It was like a NASCAR racetrack. It's like down the road was a bend, and the bend led back to the intensification of the very conditions that gave birth to a call for justice in the first place. But Martin Luther King did not have the time to develop this thinking because he died, not even a week, he died 5 days later, right? And this is what I term the risk of victory, okay? Anti-racism, and I wish I had time to go into a conversation between Ibram Kendi and Kianga Yamata Taylor, both siblings who speak about anti-racism. I will give you the slides, but I really want to speak about it in this way. That anti-racism is committed to a final destination. It's committed to equality. It's committed to inclusion, a place for racialized feet, a seat at the table. But that commitment is already a form of white accommodation. It's like fighting for a seat on the Titanic, right? It's like, I need a first-class seat on the Titanic, or I need an equal piece of a carcinogenic pie, a cancer-causing pie. It's that we have now been entrained, given the historical pressures and constraints of theft, of the transatlantic slave trade, of accommodation within cities, of having to adopt new names. We have been accommodated within the city logics of nation statehood. And so what we gain or what we aim for is what Martin Luther King was already beginning to sense at the end of his life may not be enough, that there is a trap here. Kianga Yamata Taylor had a conversation with me publicly once, and we were interrogating a piece that I wrote called Black Lives Matter, but to whom? Kianga, dear sister, is committed to the end of capitalism. She's an anti-capitalist. She famously worked with Bernie Sanders during his campaign. And she critiqued my essay, which you read, by saying that I cannot get around the idea that people drive shifts, people drive change. And I remember responding to Kianga by saying, I accept that, but what drives people, sister? How do people become peopled? Even people are not categories. People are, a people is an event within accommodative fields. Right? So I was trying to invite her to notice that it is not enough to tear down this or that, to be anti this or to be anti that, because you could lean on a wall long enough and still sustain its logic. As I've said elsewhere, lean on a wall long enough and you take the shape of the wall, right? In Haiti, as I write here, the successful slave revolt, it did not end racial capitalism. It just mutated it and adapted it to accommodate Black sovereignty while maintaining the logic of extraction and containment. Notice what is happening in the world today with the swing to the right. It's that immediately after George Floyd in 2020, there was this uproar. And then organizations started to have friendly diversity protocols. DEI became the order of the day. And now they're pulling back because there's now a new culture shift, at least in the United States. But that was as a result of the corporatization of DEI, right? That gave birth to an HR-friendly industry and made white virtue a new product that you can purchase off the shelf if only you have the resources or access to Black people. White virtue was selling like hotcake. Now, this is not to dismiss anti-racist struggle, but to reveal, as I write here, the deeper logics of accommodation that underwrite it. The point is not that anti-racism is wrong, but that its framing is already conditioned by the thing it opposes. It carries the same logic of accommodation, right? It's like, as I said elsewhere, it's like finding a fine name within the plantation. It's like planting solar panels on a slave ship. There's something about the logic of these gestures that repeats the paradigm that we're trying to get around. And so maybe this feels like I have enough time to say as well, that the anti-racist reifies the racist as a fully fleshed out autonomous individual that needs fixing. This one needs some elaboration because I don't think about the racist as a human person or you're racist, or you're racist, is because my people do not know how to think about human cells as stable entities within ecologies. And this is not limited to Yoruba people or other indigenous traditions. It is feminist, materialist. It is materialist, feminist. It is feminist, ecological. It is archetypal psychology and depth psychology. It is James Hillman. It is Karen Barad. It's Isabel Stengers. It is Donna Haraway. It's the idea that the boundaried self is a creation of the Enlightenment, right? And that agency, intentionality, all these things that we reduce in our humanist thinking to the isolated autonomous self are actually attributes of the environment, of accommodations. If we are to think about the human as cybernetic, as algorithmic, as spread out, as diasporic, not just local, but diasporic, then it is impossible to think about the racist as an essentialized structure. Instead, I would travel along the sides of Deleuze and Glissant to suggest that the racist is not a person, but an assemblage, right? The racist is an assemblage. The racist is a network of co-becoming with uneven territories, right? I think in trying to get rid of the isolated subject, we have performed the equivalent, the ontoepistemological equivalent of trying to get rid of a symptom while the syndrome remains. So this is what I call transraciality, which, as time would have it, I don't have enough moments to get into. I wish I did. Monica, I was actually preparing for 2 hours. I don't know where I got the idea that this was 2 hours, but my assistant wrote to me and said, it's 1 hour, but I'd already prepared slides enough for 2 hours. And let me just say that I'll be happy to come back to break down what I mean by transraciality. It felt necessary not to jump into the concept, but to start to massage our way into the story of it, into the story and the space of it. This is what I call transraciality. Maybe I'll just end with a single reading of this slide. Transraciality as an invitation into the deep time of racialization, an ontotheological, geosomatic, and cosmological unfolding that does not begin with human sociality, nor does it find its resolution in it. That sentence is wrong, or it should be transraciality is an invitation into the deep time of racialization. Transraciality does not begin with the I, that's the stable self. Transraciality begins with the movement that precedes the I. It invites us to think more of accommodations rather than the stabilized entities within accommodations. It is not against anti-racism. It just says anti-racism is part of the protocols and formulas of white modernity to sustain itself. And that what is needed now is to break out of the tautological loops that keep us incarcerated in an accusatory oppositional politics that doesn't know what to do at this time. It's like the eternal conflagration and conflict between Popeye and what's the other guy that Popeye is always fighting for the hand of Olivia.
Brutus.
What? Say that again, sister?
Brutus?
Is it Bruno? Bruno.
Brutus.
I think it's
Yeah.
Bruno. Yeah. Every time I watch that cartoon, and I still watch cartoons, every time I watch that cartoon, I wonder, why don't you guys just have a gentlemanly conversation? It always ends with spinach and a punch. It seems we're exhausted with that. This is an invitation to ask different kinds of questions about race, about racialization, about racism that might hopefully provoke new openings and new kinds of futures. I think I'll stop there for time.
Thank you so much, Bayo.